Howell Heflin was, to say the least, a lion of the United States Senate and a political mentor of mine. A military hero who hailed from Tuscumbia, Alabama, Judge Howell Heflin was sometimes described as the conscience of the Senate and was widely known for his unshakable integrity. It was because of that he was the chair of the Ethics Committee, I think, for 12 years running, something that he would describe as anything but enjoyable in his final remarks. But he was a man of unshakable integrity. He was part of the greatest generation who became a Marine at age 21 and served the nation during World War II. He was awarded the Silver Star for valor in combat and received 2 Purple Hearts for his action. Howell Heflin was always affectionately referred to as Judge, even by members of this body. If you read back over his last, the day he announced to his retirement on March 29th, 1995, all of his colleagues kept referring to him as Judge because of an extraordinary career, a one-term Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court, where he modernized Alabama's court system, won numerous awards for the system as well as him personally. He was known a national figure because of his work on the courts, which he later carried to help in this body do things that would streamline federal courts, to help move civil courts, to help move the criminal justice system, who always believed that justice delayed was justice denied. He was elected to the Senate in 1978, which was my 3rd year in law school. And during the summer of '78, I opted to work on his campaign full-time rather than clerk for a law firm, in part because I believe that his election, following a 20-year or more domination of Alabama politics by George Wallace, would be one of the most significant elections in Alabama's history, a turning point in Alabama for a state whose reputation had sorely suffered throughout the civil rights movement. Turned out I was right, absolutely right. Howell Heflin's election ushered in a time in Alabama where politicians in our state began to look beyond the dog whistle politics of race and do their best to represent all of the citizens of Alabama. He was a champion of the rural farmer, NASA, and businesses throughout Alabama. But he was also a champion of the small business leader, teachers, members of the union, and African-American citizens in Alabama who were still feeling the effects of discrimination and restricted voting rights. Now, by today's standards, Madam President, Howell Heflin would certainly be considered pretty conservative, with positions that many, including myself, would probably not agree with. But in his heart, Howell Heflin believed in the Constitution of the United States and strived to ensure that we live up to the creed that all are created equal. In his floor speech announcing his retirement, he said, quote, "Not until we become genuinely one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all, can this country realize its potential for true greatness," end quote. He worked as a senator to secure the extension of the Voting Rights Act, something we are still arguing about today, 23 years after he left the Senate. He appointed the first 2 African Americans to the federal bench in Alabama. Sadly, even though the number of federal judges in Alabama's 3 federal districts have grown significantly in number, there are still only 2 active federal judges in Alabama that are African American. He supported historically black colleges and universities, ensured passage of the Civil Rights Restoration Bill. He helped pass the Fair Housing Bill, and he helped to establish a national holiday honoring the late Martin Luther King Jr. Howell Heflin's commitment to racial justice and sensitivity to issues of race led him in 1993 to give a remarkable floor speech opposing an insignia patent bill that contained an image of the Confederate battle flag. This was over 20 years before Charlotte, the tragedy in Charleston, South Carolina, when battle flags across the country came down. It was 20 years or so before that, when he opposed an amendment that would have contained an image of the Confederate battle flag. It truly was a remarkable speech. I referenced it just recently in a speech I did here on the Equality Act. It was considered by many, his friends, his family, his staff, and all that knew him, especially those in this body, to be his finest hour. It was his finest hour because he, in fact, is one of those rare occasions on the floor of the Senate in which an impassioned speech of one senator sways a vote. There was a motion to reconsider on that bill, and a motion to table on that bill, and it was an amendment. And a motion to table had not succeeded. And then Heflin took to the floor to reconsider. And overwhelmingly, by a vote of over 75 to 20 something, the motion was tabled and the bill died as it should have. That led Carol Moseley Braun, the first African-American female senator in the history, to state the following about Judge Heflin: his integrity, his intelligence, his commitment and faith in the Constitution of these United States, faith in what the American dream has always stood for and can be in the future, has led Judge Heflin in a direction that I think is without peer and without parallel in this body. He has been a force for good. He has been a force for right. There are very few people that have known Howell Heflin. There are very few people in Alabama that remember him who would say otherwise. He was a force for good, and he was a force for right. I'm so proud that my first job after law school was working with him as staff counsel on the Senate Judiciary Committee. It was just an amazing experience for a kid who had never been to Washington, D.C. before taking the job. And it's now my privilege to now hold the seat that Judge Heflin had for 18 years. It is my honor. The fact that I walked off this floor with him as a staffer in 1980, walked back on in 2018 in his seat, one of the greatest honors of my life. In gratitude for that opportunity that Judge gave me, I've established a fellowship in my office for a recent law school graduate just like me in 1979, and I look forward to welcoming the first Howell Heflin Fellow to my team later this month. Howell Heflin was sworn into the Senate in 1979, 40 years ago this past January. And it was about 40 years ago this time of year that I joined his staff, fresh out of law school, fresh off of taking the bar exam. He was certainly my mentor and role model in many ways, and each day that I'm in the Senate, I strive to continue his legacy. Not that I always vote as Howell Heflin would, although frankly, knowing him as I did, I am absolutely convinced that he would have moderated many of his positions with changing times. He was that kind of leader. But I'm certainly guided by the principles of public service to his constituents that he described in his retirement announcement, where he said, "I have endeavored to represent Alabama in a studied, impartial, and fair-minded manner. My record certainly indicates at least an independent streak. I hope Alabamians know that my decisions were based on what I thought was in the best interest of my state and nation. While some may argue or disagree with my decisions, I was convinced that I was right. And I believe most Alabamians felt nothing more could be expected of me." I agree with him 100%. Ironically, Judge Heflin passed away 10 years to the day from the day he gave that speech on March 29th. I miss him. Alabama misses him. And I can assure my colleagues who didn't know him, the United States Senate misses him as well. The threads that tie Judge Heflin and Giles Perkins together in history are deeply rooted integrity and their dedication to leaving the state of Alabama better than they found it. Their memories inspire me every day. Today, following these remarks, I am dedicating the conference rooms in my Senate office to these two men who, through leadership and commitment, made a positive difference in the history of the state of Alabama as well as my life. I'm so happy that I'm going to be joined by Judge Heflin's son, Tom, and his wife, Cornelia, as well as numerous former Heflin staffers, including his longtime Chief of Staff, Mike House, who is the one who made the fateful call to me that summer as I was studying for the bar exam to offer me the job here on the Hill. Also with us will be Drew Perkins and his wife, Nellie. Drew is the brother of Giles, who will also be on hand with us as we celebrate both Judge Heflin and Giles Perkins. I would be remiss if I didn't also mention that in the corner of the Giles Perkins conference room will be the large Yoda doll that will be kept in his honor. As for me, Madam President, I strive to continue the work that they began, to fulfill their vision and to honor their memories as long as I have a privilege of serving here in the United States Senate. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor.